Hey guys. Today for this week, we're going to be kind of looking back at what we read last week and then talking about who some of the characters symbolize. So, yeah, should be fun. I actually do think it's fun because I love this book. All right, so let's talk first about what did happen last week. Um, sorry. To start in the beginning, the animals discussed animalism in secret. So remember at the beginning of chapter two, the animals are sort of like when Mr. Jones goes to bed, they're discussing like animalism, which is the new philosophy that they came up with from Old Major. So they're sort of discussing like they're working out like what it means to them, what type of society they want to live in, all that stuff. They then took over the farm pretty easily, which was a big surprise to them. But Mr. Jones was like drunk. He's pretty pathetic. He was outnumbered. So they were able to dispatch of him pretty easily. And then when Jones left, his wife and the raven left with him. So remember that this book is an allegory, or it's symbolizing what happened in the Russian Revolution. So this part here, where they take over the farm easily, that's a direct reflection or a symbol of what happened in the Russian Revolution, which is the communists were able to take over the government really easily. They expected it to be this long, drawn out civil war. But really, if you remember from that video a couple weeks ago, it wasn't like that at all. They had a couple of big demonstrations. Um, the army kind of wanted to join them anyway in real life. Like the real Russian army was sided with the communists as opposed to Czar Nicholas II, who was like the king. So in real life, the Russians took over, or I'm sorry, the communists took over the Russian government easily, just like happened here. And it was a big surprise to them. So then the pigs become the leaders and they come up with the seven commandments. They milk the cows, they kind of like start taking care of the farm, and then they set their eyes on the harvest. So those are like the big broad strokes of what happened in this chapter. So first, let's talk about kind of who some of these people symbolize, because that's a big key to understanding the novel. We talked about this last video, but Mr. Jones, he represented Czar Nicholas II. So in real life, to review, Czar Nicholas II was like the king of Russia, basically. He was in charge before the communists took over, and just like happened in the book, he was dispatched or overthrown pretty easily. Not a lot of people liked him in Russia because the society was so unfair and he was sort of the main person like perpetuating that society. So they took him over pretty easily and he then left just like the way Mr. Jones left. Okay, so Snowball and Napoleon, we talked about them a little bit in the previous slide or two slides ago. But as you can see, they're the two main pigs that are kind of leading the government now, or they're leading the farm now that Mr. Jones is gone. So they kind of are on the same side, you know. They are both animalists, and they both kind of want the same things, but they're pretty different. I'm not going to say exactly like it's Snowball and Napoleon, and they represent Stalin and Trotsky. In real life, Stalin was much harsher, more kind of like evil. He was crueler, but like stronger. And Trotsky was more of an intellectual, maybe a little bit softer. And you'll see those characters, those traits reflected in Snowball and Napoleon. So, Boxer, this is slightly confusing because Boxer doesn't represent one person in the way that like Snowball and Napoleon and Mr. Jones do. He represents a group of people. He represents like the common worker. He represents all of the average people in Russia that were like, okay, communism, that's pretty good. Sounds better than my crappy life now. Boxer is experiencing the same thing. He's not incredibly smart. And it's not to say that the Russian person that he's representing wasn't necessarily smart, but the Russian people at the time of the Russian Revolution weren't educated at all. Like many of them couldn't read. They were just like peasant farmers. That was their entire life. So Boxer in that same way, isn't particularly intelligent. He's not educated, but he's very happy to go along with whatever Snowball and Napoleon say. And he's very enthusiastic. Like, he is super into animalism. He is super into what they're spouting in the Seven Commandments. And that's reflected in real life. Most Russian people were extremely into communism when it first started. They thought, oh, everyone's going to be equal. We're going to share in everything. There's not going to be rich people or poor people. Everyone's going to kind of be in the middle. Well, if you're a poor person and the government is now telling you, hey, there's not going to be any more poor people, we're all going to be the same. Well, that sounds really, really good. So that's kind of why they were so into it. Okay, so this is where you come in. Raven, he's a small character. He's not in it a lot, but he's important, and I want you guys to maybe try and figure out who he represents. So Raven tells the animals, this is before they take over for Mr. Jones, or they take over the farm from Mr. Jones as they're discussing animalism in secret. And Raven keeps talking about like the afterlife, which in the book is called Sugar Candy Mountain. Um, his focus is on what happens after you die, and that's kind of what's guiding his principles. Like, he's kind of okay with animalism, but he's like, well, yeah, but we first and foremost we have to get to heaven, aka Sugar Candy Mountain. Um, and then when Mr. Jones leaves, he leaves right with them. So what I want you guys to do is try to figure out who you think the Raven, who again is all about the afterlife and rules for living, represents. Okay, well, that one's kind of tricky because he doesn't represent one person, he represents a group of people. He represents the church. And when I say the church, in Russia and all of Europe at this time, there's pretty much just one form of religion. There's Christianity. There's a lot of different forms of Christianity, but almost everyone in Europe is either Christian or Jewish at this point. Uh, and then come along the communists. Now, in real life, the communists were atheists. They did not believe in God. They thought that God and religion was like a tool used by rich people and governments to keep people happy and complacent or content in their crappy lives. So it's like, in other words, rich people are happy to be Christian because they can just tell the poor people, hey, well, it doesn't really matter if you're poor. All that really matters is heaven. This life doesn't really matter compared to an eternity of either heaven or hell. Now, if you're a rich person, it's easy for you to say that, oh, this life doesn't really matter because your life is good. If you're a poor person, it's like, well, this life does matter because I'm miserable. So communists were anti-church. They did not believe in God. Some exceptions, but for the most part, they were anti-church, anti-God. And so when the communists took over in Russia, the church left with them. The church buildings obviously remained, but there was no religion in Russia from the time of the communists took over to essentially the time they left. Like, communism and religion really don't go together. In a sense, communism, or in the case of Animal Farm, animalism, is sort of like its own religion. All right. Well, that's all I've got. There's a lot of other characters who we've already been introduced to that have symbolic value. Like, I'm forgetting her name, but the horse who's really into like the ribbons. What is her name? I can't remember. She's called a mare, which is like a horse. She's a symbol for something. Squealer is a symbol for something. So a lot of these characters have some deeper symbolic value, but I just wanted to focus on those. All right, so guys, what you're going to do this week, you're going to read chapter 3. You are then going to take a little reading quiz over it and then do a flip grid. All right, that's it. Bye. Hold up. Okay, that's it. Bye.